All right. Hello, everyone. So today we have Yvette Guzman visiting us through our homes, well, welcoming us into your home. So as you can see, we're all very comfy. We're going to try to make this a casual conversation and dialogue. You guys have already posted your questions, which is how we're going to be tracking attendance. So thank you for that. All right. So let me go ahead and minimize this. Now, Yvette, as was posted under the week's module, works for Healthcare Partners. She has a bachelor's degree in human services, then went on to Peace Corps, where she was in Ecuador working with older adults, then came back and did her MSW from USC. So thank you and welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're gonna just kind of go through your questions, talk about them, get some answers. We're not gonna try to make this too long because we have a lot to cover in this week's class. So we're not going to be going in depth into these answers, and we're going to see how that works. All right, so John Beavers has 3 questions. First question is, what is a pro and con of working with elderly people? What are some of the pros and cons of working with elderly people?
I think there are far more pros than cons, but I may be biased. One of the biggest pros, I think, working with the elderly is the fact that they have lived long lives and have a wealth of wisdom and experience to share with anyone who's willing to listen. So a lot of times I get a lot of information and I learn so much from my patients that I work with. Some of the cons can be that not only do I have to work with the elderly, but their families as well. And sometimes there's overbearing adult children that can actually be worse than my patients. So sometimes that is a little tricky to maneuver around, but I would say that's the biggest con.
Yeah. And second question is, what is a skilled nursing facility, which is where you're working now? I think that's a great question.
Very great question. Essentially, what a skilled nursing facility is once a patient is discharged from a hospital, typically, and still needs something, a skilled need, that can range from something like IV antibiotics that can't be done at home, something like physical therapy and occupational therapy. So a patient who maybe suffered from a stroke and needs help with mobility. So getting from the bed to a wheelchair to the toilet, those types of things. There's therapists on hand that are working with those patients to get better, to get to a point where they can safely discharge home and back with their families and whatnot.
Thank you. And next question is, what exactly do you do for patients in hospice? And you brought up that people may not know what hospice means. So if you could explain that for a little bit.
So briefly, definitely a expanded. It says no internet. Or am I still recording?
I think so. Yeah.
Sorry, take 2.
The bloopers.
Sorry, guys.
We're not editing this. I don't even know how to edit this. So
I don't know either. We're gonna go with it.
keep on rolling.
Anyways, hospice is a Medicare benefit, and not every person who has Medicare qualifies for it. So essentially, you have to have a certain ailment or disease that technically doesn't have a cure, and it could potentially only give you about a 6-month window of expected life expectancy. With that being said, once you are on hospice, essentially you have a round-the-clock care team, whether that's a doctor, nurses. Typically they come to you. It's like a house calls type of program where all the medications delivered to you, all medical services in general are come to you. With that, a social worker, a lot of times patients are pretty okay with or have come to terms with their end of life stage. However, it's typically families that need a lot of assistance, a lot of emotional support, really just talking to them and talking them through what their feelings are, and how we can best serve them at this very delicate time in their lives, or in their care, or in their loved ones' lives. So that's just like a little snippet of what hospice is.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
And what do you normally do for patients in hospice? So when you say that it's primarily like families that need help and support, like what kind of stuff would you help families with?
Yeah. So just because someone's in hospice, they still need a lot of care. So the biggest thing that I see is connecting families to resources in terms of caregiver resources. A lot of times, maybe one family member or couple are round the clock 24/7 caregiver for the patient that's in hospice, and it can be very tiring. So trying to find respite care for people, so that they can take a little bit of a break and be the best caregiver that they can be, because they also need to take care of themselves. And then just go through things like mortuary and burial plans. A lot of times, um, patients have an idea of what they want their burial to look like, and to make sure that that is followed through, and assist the family in that, and take some of that burden off of the family.
Yeah. So we're gonna go on to the next question because that was actually a question I just threw in there. I'm gonna try not to do that. All right, Tyrone Lopez. Um, I did not like edit this. I just copied and pasted. So I'm gonna just read the whole thing. How does she deal with the loss of a person she got to know in the hospice unit where she works? I also work in a hospice unit at the VA hospital in Long Beach, and I can say that it always disturbs me when a veteran from the ward passes away and we have to give the veteran his or her final 10-second salute before the body is taken from the ward, which I'll have to say, I did not know that. That's new information for me. So thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. And you see the difference in what that looks like in a hospital setting compared to in the veteran community, which is such a close-knit community.
Definitely. I think it's okay to feel certain feelings when someone passes, and we're human beings. And I can definitely say that I always have emotions when someone passes. It can be a very somber moment, but it's also an opportunity to celebrate the life that that person had as well. How do I deal with it? Sometimes it gets to me, and I have to really check myself and check in with myself and make sure that I'm doing okay. Sometimes I need to practice my own self-care and make sure that I try my best not to take it home with me, and know that I did everything I could as a social worker for this patient. And it's really a blessing and an opportunity for me to be part of the end stage of someone's life. So just reminding myself that, I think, really helps me prepare for the next person or a next patient that I would have to come encounter. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this next question is from Brian Rumas or Rumas. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Rumas, I think. A question for Yvette. When working with hospice people and knowing that they are about to die, does that have any effect on your state of mind? When starting to work there and an adult comes in as hospice, sometimes you get to know them and some pass quicker than others. How do you cope with that?
Um, I think it comes with a job, knowing that I'm in hospice, knowing that this is a program for people who are at the end stages of their lives, and being prepared as best I can. Again, kind of similar to the question prior, is that you just have to know that you're doing the best you can. It gets to you at times. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be sad with the family. Like, you see other people mourning, you're going to feel something. And I'd be concerned if I didn't feel anything. So with that being said, knowing that it's part of the job, knowing that I get the opportunity to work with someone at this very sensitive stage in their lives, like, I think it's an awesome experience. I know it sounds a little morbid, but I really do. I feel like it's such a blessing for me, and I want to make sure that I can do the best I can for the family at this time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point and great questions. We talked a little bit about like just self-care in the beginning, and I feel like that goes right along with it. All right, so question from Areli Castro. What made you get a bachelor's degree in human services and then a master's in social work?
Good question. So in terms of the bachelor's degree in human services, I have always had a desire to help people in whatever capacity. 18-year-old Yvette, I just know I wanted to help people, and human services sounds like a degree that I would help people. So honestly, that's how I chose that. And I would have it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's 6:39 p.m. We've both been working all day from home,
Yep.
so
It's
long day
actually
for
more
that. A
time.
lot of you guys are tired as well, so
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I wanted to help people, and so it just kind of fit.
so
And
you
as
took the degree after you were already at the college. I mean the
um,
major.
so I started off as a sociology major.
Mm,
Um, let's start that. I started off as a sociology major because I thought it sounded interesting. However, as I started taking some of those courses, I felt like it wasn't for me because a lot of it was statistics,
research.
more like the research-based stuff, which is great, and I do appreciate that. But it's more boots on the ground, um, face-to-face contact with patients, or I say patients, just with people in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so human services was definitely the way for me. They offered, well, part of my program at Cal State Fullerton is I had to have 3 internships by the time I graduated. So really getting to know different nonprofits within Orange County was super helpful. And so that's kind of where my whole career started.
Yeah.
And then going into my master's degree. So after I graduated, I had done a couple like volunteer trips to different countries around the world, and I knew that I would probably want to get my master's, but I wasn't quite sure, on the fence. So I wanted to take a meaningful break, and that meaningful break was a 27-month stint within the Peace Corps in Ecuador. I was in a small town in Ecuador. Got the opportunity to work with older adults. Again, it solidified my understanding that the older adults, or I call them my oldies, was the niche, and that's the population that I love to work with. And so coming back, applied for my master's while I was in Ecuador, came back, got accepted to USC, got my master's in social work, and now here I am working with older adults here in the States with my master's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So Jackie Thomas asked, my question is, how do you maintain a positive attitude when dealing with death and dying? So a little different from Brian's question about coping.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you maintain a positive attitude? Because that's a good point, being around that so often.
Death and dying is not a happy topic by any means, but I think what is the way that I do, the way that helps me maintain a positive attitude is knowing that if roles were reversed and I had a loved one or a family member that was on hospice, how would I want the person who's giving my loved one services, how would I want them to be treating my loved one? And I really try to put myself in their shoes and make sure that I am always as positive as empathetic or as understanding as I can be. So that's kind of how I maneuver through that.
Yeah, and this question is in the same realm.
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain your own emotional and mental health well-being? And how does it affect your emotional and mental health well-being in working with that population or with dying patients?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just have to cry it out and be okay with crying it out. Not in front of the patients, of course. You never want to make it about you and your like emotional, I guess your emotional state. Yeah. But sometimes there's times in the car where I'm on my way home, I need to just really process things and I end up crying. Okay, let it out. And sometimes I feel most of the time I do feel so much better after I just get that out. Talking to other social workers a lot of times, really, they understand what the day-to-day life of a social worker seems like. Talk to Jess, talk to a lot of different people. Yeah. To really just kind of vent and get those emotions out and really process things.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
sure. Right. So Angela Velez asked, since graduating from USC's master's program, would you recommend it? Or after working in the field, would you recommend another MSW program?
In terms of
I get that
MSW,
question a lot, actually.
yeah. I love USC. I had a great experience at USC.
Mhm.
It's a pretty penny. Everyone knows that. So, just to be frank, I think you can get just as good of a program for half the cost anywhere else. So, it really just depends on what you are willing to spend, what your dreams are. My dream school was USC. So, I just bit the bullet and I went there and I have my degree. And I don't regret it necessarily, but I do think there are plenty of alternatives that are just as good, if not better. So I'll
Now,
leave it
I'll
at that.
say this though. How long has it been since you've graduated from USC?
I graduated in 2017.
Okay, so it's been close to 3 years.
Yeah,
Not a long time.
not a long time.
Are you still paying off the debt?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, you
I'll
are? I actually thought you were done. Oh, I'm sorry. Ooh, that didn't
go.
go as planned.
Oh, girl, no, it's okay. Um, yeah, I'm still paying off that loan.
Is it
He's
manageable? Because I think that a lot of people like question that, like, is it manageable? Will I be making enough in the field of social work that doesn't pay a lot of money in comparison to other master's level degrees and
right.
be able to manage student loans?
It's manageable. It's definitely manageable. I think, especially if you start off maybe working in a nonprofit sector, you get a lot of breaks in terms of payments. You get income-based payments. So depending on your income, that's where they kind of prorate or they rate your monthly payment. So it's okay, but it's a lot to pay off. Let's
Yeah.
just leave it at that.
And depending on what situation individuals are in, they might choose that. So, for example, when I first graduated from grad school, I had the option of moving in with my parents rent free for a
Mm-hmm.
little bit before needing to go off. Now, for other people, if you're a parent, you have children, if you have kids that may be going on to college soon themselves, like it's a whole other question. So, thank you for being willing to talk about that because I don't remember having anybody talk about those things
No, that's a very
before.
good question. Because, yeah,
Yeah.
it's something to consider as well, going into any field or really committing to any program.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So next question, Coraima Lopez Ramirez asked, how is it working with the elderly and their families when discussing the elderly's illness and future decisions?
Say that it's always a difficult conversation to have, but it really just depends on the family and how realistic they are about the patient or the elderly's condition, their prognosis. It can go a lot of different ways. I would say it's always a little awkward to bring up things like an advanced healthcare directive. Basically, it's a document that says, if this were to happen, if I can't make these decisions for myself, what do I want done? Who do I want to speak for me?
My
If
life.
there's a family of like 8 kids, which I've had, and all of them have different ideas of what mom should and shouldn't do, it can get a little touchy and a little intense, I should say. So um, it's a skill that I am still developing and learning from each family and each situation on a daily basis.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So from Susan Musselman, now she asked one question and then after being able to see everybody else's questions, she came back and asked another. So I'll read both and then you can kind of choose what to answer.
Mm-hmm.
How are you able to maintain a loving detachment with your dying clients and their families? Where does that strength come from? I don't necessarily think that question was repeated. I do think that it's different in terms of, because I think it highlights this idea of, we talked about privilege a couple weeks ago, and I'm not saying that this is specifically privilege, but just the concept that just because you are working somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that your own life experiences didn't affect that path. So, what are some things that have given you strength and being able to work in such a vulnerable time in someone's life. Seeing people die or being around death and dying, like, it's not for everyone, you know. So being able to identify like what personal strengths help you be that person, I think it's a great question. Next question is, have you read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's works on death and dying, and what info did you find helpful?
Um,
Actually
Great.
haven't fully read that, so.
I actually have it. I saw the question and I have the book sitting on my shelf right here, and I haven't read all of it through. I mean, I had to
Either.
read it.
That's why I was just kind of like, ooh, like,
Oh,
well,
well, we should probably read that while we're in quarantine.
I'm impressed. Yeah, no, but it is a known book for, and if anybody is interested in working with the death and dying, I highly recommend that you get the book. In fact, right now, Long Beach Library, if you have a Long Beach Library account, maybe even through LBCC, I don't know, has online ebooks available. So if you have an account, are looking for something to do while you're in quarantine or self-isolating, you might be interested in looking up that book, seeing if you can read it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think in a lot of those concepts in terms of just stages of grief and whatnot can be applied not only with death and dying, but just life in general.
Yeah.
I do think it's a valuable, any of her work is really a valuable, I guess, thing to read in the social work field in general. So how are you able to maintain a loving detachment with your dying clients and their families? With practice, it doesn't always work. I'm going to be frank. It really doesn't. Sometimes you do tend to take some things home and you have to process through it and counter transference. Big word, sorry. Feelings.
Our weekly terms. We'll bring that up later.
I think so. It's important. But yeah, feeling a certain way to the extreme, either way, can be difficult for a social worker, and really acknowledging those feelings and working through that. So where does my strength come from? I think my personal experiences in terms of having dealt with death and dying with various family members, and knowing that, you know, I'm very close to grandparents now, and just knowing that is inevitable, and just really putting myself in the other person's situation and really motivating me to just work with those families as if that were my own family, or that was my loved one, I guess.
Yeah.
That can be a whole journal, honestly. I might have to journal about that later tonight. I'd have to think about it more.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we have 6 more questions just to kind of see where we're at. So a little bit more than halfway. Irene Lobato asked, how do you keep from getting emotional and getting attached to your patients in hospice? So I know we've talked about the emotional piece a little bit, but the attachment, you know, how do you kind of keep boundaries? I think that's a good point, or good.
Yeah, so boundaries is a definitely another skill that you learn as you continue your career in social work. I can definitely say that I'm better at setting boundaries now than I was 3 years ago when I first graduated with my master's degree. It's something that you learn to maneuver through and understand, hey, maybe this boundary is being pushed a little too much, reel it back in. Why is it being pushed? You have to always recognize why you are feeling the certain ways and really try to explore that a little more. It doesn't always work, but just know that you're there to do a job. At the end of the day, it's your job, and that these are patients that you're serving, family members that you're serving, and you are a component or player in that process, but you are not part of that family.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think setting boundaries is how you keep yourself from getting attached. So not only in bad situations, but also sometimes
good situations too.
Yeah, good situations. Because you won't be able to make decisions for patients. So, all right, Deanne Marborough. I wanted to know how she got into the Peace Corps, and how did she, and how did the work you did in South America affect the community you were assigned to? So kind of the post effect, which I don't think enough people talk about, because
Yeah,
that does happen.
it does. So in terms of just how I got into the Peace Corps, like I mentioned, was going to graduate with my bachelor's in human services. I decided that maybe this was the route I wanted to go, wanted to have a meaningful break. The application process took about a year. I think things have changed now, but it took about a year, a lot of interviews, and a lot of like letters of recommendations, essays and stuff. Then I was assigned to Ecuador, went to Ecuador. They, during this process, they ask, you know, if there's a certain itch that you have, or a certain population you like to work with, experience. And so I obviously said older adults. They had a village in Ecuador, that Salinas de Guaranda, to be exact, up in the Andes Mountains, of 500 people. And I'm from Orange County, so that was a big difference. Actually, my oldies are right here. I have a picture of them. I love them dearly. Anyway, so was assigned to my little town. We did like a needs assessment in terms of what kind of things can I help with. Older adults and self-isolation was a big issue. A lot of it's a farming town. So as older you get, physically you're unable to farm. So what do you do when you farmed your whole entire life? You kind of sit around in the house. So we created a senior center for them, got some funding, did that. And in terms of now that I've left, that was 3 years ago, the senior center is still around. I had Peace Corps volunteers after me that have continued the project, and it's going strong, actually. So I'm really proud of it. That's my little.
You still communicate with them?
I do. I still communicate with them through Skype. They look like this. They don't really know how to use it, and I usually just.
I love that. I love that.
But yeah, I still communicate with them. I have a local gal who heads the senior center, who's from, or so her and I are great friends. So we still chat, and she makes sure to bring her phone with her when we do chat, and I say hi to everyone.
Oh, I love that.
And they ask about my dog too. I adopted a dog from Ecuador.
Yeah. So. Oh, they got to meet her. Oh.
Yeah, they trained her. They had to sit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it's a very memorable experience, and I love my oldies in Ecuador. So.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so from Vanessa Salazar, what was the hardest thing to get past? For example, words, feelings, expressing yourself in a manner that demonstrated you cared when discussing death with someone and their loved one. So what?
Sorry, I got a little distracted with the dogs in the background. I'm sorry.
Okay. What was the hardest thing to get past when discussing death with someone and their loved one? So, for example, words, feelings, expressing yourself in a manner that demonstrated you cared.
The hardest thing to get past would be separating the family's emotions to my emotions. So
that's
really, yeah. So if it's not an easy topic, a lot of families are very anxious about the topic, very just distraught, emotionally distraught, and still have a kind and caring aura about you, but also really trying to make sure that none of that really affects you at that point in time, because again, it's not about you, it's about what you can offer to patients and their families at that point in time. So really trying to create that boundary when those tough topics come up, or just the word hospice is really triggering for a lot of people. So educating people on what that means, services, the benefits of it, trying to get, it's a dance. It's a dance with every single family, and it goes all different ways every single time. So I can't give you a direct answer, but I would say just making sure that those boundaries are set, so that way you can move forward and provide the best services for your patients and family.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I honestly was like, I don't know how I would answer that. Yeah, toughie. All right, from good question, just like hard to like really conceptualize and identify. Anyways,
that could be a whole lecture.
I know. That's a good point. All right. From Leslie Vasquez, do you find a lot of big differences between the population you've worked with in Ecuador and the population you work with now? Are they similar beside the differences of cultures?
Yeah, I would say there are similarities, but there are a lot of differences just because the environment itself is completely different. The skilled nursing facilities that I rotate in are all in Orange County. Again, like I mentioned, I call them oldies. My oldies in Ecuador were farmers, most of them illiterate. Most of them had never seen anyone outside of Ecuador, had never seen something like the beach. They've lived in their same town their whole entire life. So just the mindset is very different. But some similarities would be the fact that they have so much knowledge, so much wisdom in life circumstances, and you can still learn so much from each of them. So yeah, there are differences, but at the end of the day, they're an older adult who's lived their lives and, are still a vulnerable population.
Yeah. So earlier I said we had 6 questions left. I lied. I forgot that there was another page. So we have 4 questions left, but not a whole. It was just
Okay.
a 2-question difference. There's 21. All right, Joanna Perez. What interested you in working with older adults? So other than, I know you talked a little bit about just how your experience in Ecuador shaped you, but you mentioned that before going to Ecuador, you had already identified older adults as an interest. So I'm curious about that.
First and foremost, my grandparents helped raise me. So along with my parents, but they were a big part of my life, and just growing up with older adults really just shows how they just have a special place in my heart. And then also seeing how they are such a vulnerable population in terms of just services and things that maybe they don't know about. A lot of times older adults are set in their ways, like I mentioned, and don't know any better. And so, here I come along and try to educate them as best I can and help them live a long, happy, independent life as best as I can. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the case for a lot of people, right? How our family shapes up. So we were talking about eco maps. I don't know if last week or the week prior, but just the concept of there's different groups and different things that shape who we are, and we affect them as well. So it's kind of a interchanging process. I think that's a good example of that. Next question we have from Andrea S. We have 2 Andreas. Andrea Simon or Simon? I can't remember. I think it's Simon. Andrea Simon. All right. How do you maintain patience working with older adults? And what is the greatest advice you can give regarding working with them?
Just listen. That's my biggest, I think, with any person, but just oftentimes older adults, I feel like, are pushed kind of off to the side. So just really getting the chance to just take a moment, eye to eye. Let's listen. Tell me your story. Tell me what's going on. And I think that really opens up the floodgates in how I can help a patient. And so I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. And then in terms of maintaining patience, I sound like a broken record. I imagine that being my grandma or my grandpa sitting across from me. So I'm going to maintain as much patience as I would give them, within reason, of course. I don't have 10 hours to just sit and chit chat as much as I would love to. It's not always the case. So, take it with a grain of salt, but just give them a little opportunity to talk.
Yeah. All right. And next we have Andrea T. Andrea Tafoya. What made you want to work with older adults, and what motivates you to keep doing it?
Again, grandparents, I love older adults. You can learn so much. They're actually very similar to children, but I like them more than children, but that's just me. Yeah.
What motivates you to keep working with them? Like, what do you think keeps you with that population? Because you've moved around from different environments, but you still keep that population.
Yeah. It's still a growing population, and I just feel like they are very vulnerable. like children, very vulnerable, but I do think that someone needs to advocate for them. Someone needs to make sure that they are being connected to the resources that are available to them, keeps on educating them on things that they can do. So I think that's a big motivating factor, and just knowing as a social worker, you always want to be the advocate for those underserved populations, and older adults is definitely one of them.
Yeah, that was one of our keywords that will be on the midterm. Advocacy.
Yay.
Anthony Avila, last question.
Mhm.
How was your experience working in Ecuador?
It was amazing, and I encourage anyone who is willing to spend 2 years, 27 months in a different country and immersing yourself in a different culture and working alongside community organizations. That would be an awesome opportunity if you're willing to do it.
You know, I actually would love to, even at this stage in my life. I think if at some point I just kind of need a break. You know, if there was one thing that this whole like self-isolating thing is making me realize, is just how we have disconnected from just nature and fun, and how busy American life normally is. Like, I was walking my dogs today around the block, and people were saying, "Hey, how are you? Stay healthy." Like, we don't really do that as much anymore. And I find that going to different cultures, particularly small towns, something so different from what we're so used to in Long Beach, can have just such an amazing impact and print on your life.
It really does, and it's an experience in my life that I'll never forget. And I really do feel like it's not for everyone, but for those who feel like can do it, I feel like it's such an awesome opportunity to really disconnect from the States, bring some of your culture with you, because a lot of times people are really interested in the States, and educate them that it's maybe not as what they believe it. Yeah. So it's just a learning opportunity all the way around. So it's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Yvette, so much for joining us. We
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
You're our guinea pig.
Yay.
All right.
I
So
hope it worked out. Sorry for the bloopers.
now I'm sure it'll be fun. I enjoyed it. It's great.
Right?
All right. Well, I'm going ahead and stop this, and this should be posted, and I will text you right now.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.